we live in this era where music is basically just fed to us by an algorithm.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Like you open Spotify or Apple Music and a machine just endlessly serves up these perfectly smooth, frictionless playlists.
Right. The algorithm just takes over.
Exactly. I mean, if you're listening to indie pop, it analyzes the sonic profile of your selection and feeds you exactly 3 more hours of identical indie pop. It's designed to never startle you.
It's safe. Very clean.
Yeah, safe and clean. But, there was a time, not that long ago really, when getting a mix of music meant someone actually had to build it track by track.
I mean, actually hunting down the files.
Right. Hunting them down,
Yep.
sequencing them for emotional impact, and physically burning them onto a disc.
Mm-hmm.
And today, we're looking at the absolute apex predator of that era.
We really are.
I am talking about the equivalent of a handcrafted, LimeWire-bitten, jewel-cased, 700 megabyte CDR beast.
I love that description. So we are diving into a manifesto and the accompanying DJ notes for a massive 74-track, 3-hour and 24-minute mixtape.
3.5 hours, man.
Yeah, curated by an individual who simply goes by JJ. It's called Mental Overload, a mega mixtape full mix.
And the file itself is a massive 467.4 megabytes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a continuous 320 kilobits per second MP3 download, which, I mean, for anyone who wasn't downloading music at the turn of the millennium, that was kind of the holy grail of audio formats, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely. It was the perfect compromise of that Y2K era. A 320 kilobits per second MP3 was, compressed just enough that you could actually download it over a decent internet connection without it taking a literal month.
Right, without tying up the family phone line forever.
Exactly. But it retained enough of the high and low frequency data that it still sounded incredibly rich and full on a good set of speakers.
Yeah.
And it is a very specific, deliberate container for the audio journey JJ has built here. Because looking at the track list, it seems completely chaotic at first glance.
Oh, totally random.
Right. You are jumping across decades, across entirely different cultures, and across these extreme friction points in musical history.
And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. What we find most interesting about this mix and what you, the listener, really need to know before you even think about pressing play on this marathon is the hidden architecture behind it.
The blueprint.
Yeah, the structural blueprint. If you have ever felt overwhelmed by how disjointed modern music genres can feel, bouncing from rap to rock to pop, JJ's notes provide the thread connecting all of them. The genres aren't isolated islands. They are completely intertwined.
And the foundational layer of that blueprint, according to JJ's notes, well, it begins with technology.
Yeah, technology.
Yeah. Before we can trace how a heavy metal guitar riff connects to a 1990s hip-hop beat, we have to look at how technological evolution acts as the ultimate catalyst for new sounds.
Right.
JJ specifically starts this mix in the 1980s, focusing heavily on the dawn of the electronic revolution.
We're talking about 80s pop.
Exactly.
The notes point out 2 specific hallmarks of this era that JJ uses as the starting line. Those incredibly bright, sequenced bass lines and gated snares.
The famous gated snare.
Yeah. I hear the term gated snare thrown around a lot when people talk about 80s nostalgia.
Right.
But what is physically happening to the audio to make it sound like that?
So think of a traditional drum recording in the 1970s. You hit a snare drum in a large room, and the microphone captures the initial crack of the drum head,
Right.
followed by a natural fading echo as the sound bounces off the walls. That fade is the reverberation. But a gated snare, it was originally a studio mistake.
Wait, really? A mistake?
Yeah, engineers applied a noise gate, which is a piece of technology designed to cut off an audio signal entirely once the volume drops below a certain threshold.
Okay.
So the drummer hits the snare, you get that massive initial crack, but before the echo can naturally fade out, the noise gate violently slams shut.
Oh, it just chops it off.
It artificially chops off the tail end of the sound. It creates this massive, punchy, almost vacuum-like sonic boom that just became the defining characteristic of 80s pop music, most famously with Phil Collins.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because it sets up the entire premise of the mixtape. The people designing these synthesizers and noise gates in these pristine recording studios, they were just trying to give pop and rock bands a tighter, punchier sound.
Yeah, a clean sound.
But it's like someone inventing a highly addictive synthetic new drug in a sterile corporate laboratory, right?
That's a good way to look at it.
It was intended for a very specific clinical use in mainstream pop. But it didn't stay in the lab. It's like dropping a single pebble into a pond, and the ripples unexpectedly wash up on the shores of completely different genres.
Yeah.
That synthetic sound was immediately diverted to the underground, where artists completely reverse-engineered its intended use.
What's fascinating here is how quickly that technology bypassed its original creators.
Yep.
JJ's notes map out how those bright synthetic pop elements leaked out of the high-end studios and traveled directly to the Bronx.
Oh, wow.
You have pioneers like Africa Bambaataa getting their hands on futuristic Roland drum machines and synthesizer loops. They took these tools, which were, designed to emulate real instruments, and pushed them to sound as robotic and alien as possible.
Right, layering them over heavy beats to create original wave electro-funk rap.
Exactly. And at the exact same time, on a parallel track, that same technological wave smoothed out into what JJ categorizes as sophisticated 80s R&B.
Oh, I see.
Studio drum machines were originally adopted by record labels simply to save money. I mean, they didn't want to pay human session drummers.
Classic record label move.
Right. But the rigid mathematical perfection of the drum machine ended up creating an entirely new, incredibly lush synthetic groove. The technology simply outgrew the people who invented it.
But if this new electronic sound was so mathematically perfect and clean, how long did it take for people to just get utterly sick of it and rebel? Because, human beings don't usually like pristine perfection for very long.
No, they definitely don't. And that brings us to the second major theme JJ maps out in this mixtape.
The pendulum swing.
Yes, the perpetual pendulum swing between studio polish and basement grit. Every time music reaches a point of absolute glossy perfection, it triggers a violent reaction.
Like clockwork.
Exactly. JJ details this evolution meticulously by looking at the lineage of rap and soul.
Following the notes, we start with old-school R&B and soul. This was a foundation built entirely on organic, instrument-driven storytelling.
Real instruments.
Yeah, the physical sweat of the musicians in the room. Real bass players locking in with real drummers. The sweeping cinematic arrangements of massive horn sections. The microphones capturing the natural air and bleed of the recording studio. It was lush and highly musical.
But the youth always look at the lush, expensive art of their parents and want to tear it apart.
Always.
So we enter the golden age of rap, and suddenly that organic, sweeping foundation is aggressively stripped down to its barest bones.
Hip-hop producers weren't hiring horn sections.
No, not at all. They were taking their parents' polished soul records, finding a single gritty 4-second drum break, capturing it in an early sampler, and looping it infinitely.
Oh, I love that.
The dust popping on the vinyl needle actually became part of the texture. It was no longer about lush musicality. It became this hypnotic, repetitive vehicle for raw, poetic social realism. They needed a harsh, uncompromising sonic backdrop to tell authentic stories about street survival and poverty.
But wait, looking at JJ's notes, the end game of that gritty, street-level revolution doesn't stay in the basement.
No, it doesn't.
The notes show that rawness eventually morphing into turn-of-the-millennium rap. We're talking about the Y2K era of Eminem, Eve, the Rough Riders, Dr. Dre's 2001 album. JJ explicitly defines this era of the mix as glossy, high-budget, and razor-sharp.
Very sharp.
So wait, the gritty basement-level rebellion of Golden Age rap eventually becomes the multi-million-dollar, pristine pop rap of the 2000s. It feels like a paradox where the ultimate rebellion just eventually becomes the mainstream establishment.
Yeah.
It goes from a guy hooking up 2 turntables to a street lamp in a park to pristine, untouchable studio perfection.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you're hitting on the exact engine that drives this entire 74-track mixtape.
Oh, really?
You aren't spotting a flaw in the evolution, you are spotting the mechanism itself. JJ calls this the cycle of mainstream rebellion.
The cycle of mainstream rebellion.
Okay, music is locked in a constant tug of war. When something gets too polished, like the lush soul of the 70s or the synth pop of the 80s, the youth rebel and create something raw and gritty.
Right.
But as that gritty music gains traction, it scales up. It attracts corporate record label money. The artists get larger budgets. They move out of the basement and into state-of-the-art studios. They hire top-tier producers, and the sound inevitably becomes glossy again.
The pendulum swings completely back to polish.
Exactly.
The basement always eventually buys a pristine glass mansion. Does this cycle only happen in hip-hop and R&B, or is this like a universal rule of gravity for all music?
It's universal. JJ includes a section in the notes called the counterculture mirror, proving that no genre exists in a vacuum.
Oh, interesting.
While hip-hop was busy stripping down soul music in the late 80s and early 90s, guitar-driven rock was going through the exact same identity crisis, driven by the exact same cultural exhaustion.
So, on the rock side, The pristine glass mansion was 1980s arena rock, right? The massive hair, the spandex, the pyrotechnics, and the incredibly overproduced cavernous studio sound.
Yep. And the culture grew exhausted by that level of synthetic artifice.
They wanted real again.
People craved something that felt real and ugly. That craving birthed the DIY anti-mainstream ethos of old-school alternative rock and 90s grunge.
Which was so raw.
Grunge was a violent rejection of studio polish. It was characterized by flannel shirts, heavily distorted, slightly out-of-tune guitars, and just screaming, visceral angst.
But just like the hip-hop cycle, I mean, a movement can't sustain that level of raw, screaming anger forever. It just burns itself out.
It definitely does.
JJ's mix shows how, as we move into the late 90s and early 2000s, that aggressive grunge sound mellowed. And the mechanism of change here is fascinating. You had these angry alternative bands realizing they could play quiet acoustic sessions on MTV and still captivate an audience.
Right, the unplugged era.
Yeah. And that realization birthed the hazy, nostalgic, mid-tempo spaces of early 2000s daydream rock.
The notes specifically highlight the transition into shoegaze and atmospheric indie rock during this section.
I always love explaining the term shoegaze to people who haven't heard it.
It's a great literal term.
It literally comes from the musicians standing completely still on stage, staring down at their shoes. But they weren't just being shy. They were staring down at massive, complex pedal boards, constantly stepping on different switches to manipulate their guitar signals into these massive, beautiful washing walls of atmospheric noise.
Yeah, very atmospheric.
The music goes from a raw, angry scream to a lush, heavily processed whisper. Once again, the rebellion gets a budget now, buys a bunch of expensive equipment, and gets polished.
And JJ doesn't just leave these two timelines, the hip-hop timeline and the rock timeline, running parallel forever.
They have to crash, right?
Exactly. The 74 tracks are meticulously sequenced to lead us to a collision point. The climax of this mix, the absolute final puzzle piece in JJ's blueprint, is the modern synthesis of newer alternative metal and metalcore.
Wow.
It is the moment all the timelines crash into each other.
Here's where it gets really interesting. To me, metalcore on this mixtape acts like a piece of structural welding.
Structural welding, I like that.
It takes the heavy, load-bearing steel beams of hardcore punk, installs the hazy atmospheric glass windows of shoegaze, and wires the entire building with the slick, pristine electrical production of modern pop music. It's like Frankenstein's monster stitching punk, shoegaze, and pop into one crushing skyscraper-sized movement.
That is spot on. And this is where JJ provides a very specific DJ note that you absolutely have to listen for when you play this mix.
Okay, what is it?
When you reach the metalcore climax of the playlist, pay close attention to the rhythmic chugging of the guitars during a heavy breakdown.
The chug.
Yeah. JJ points out that the syncopated, heavy, rhythmic chug of a modern metalcore guitar actually mirrors the heavy boom-bap bounce of a golden-era rap drum machine.
Wait, mind blown. Wait, explain the mechanism there. How does a guy screaming with a distorted guitar sound like a hip-hop beat?
It comes down to a piece of technology called the MPC, the MIDI Production Center.
Oh, right, the MPC.
This was a classic drum machine used heavily in 90s hip-hop.
Yeah.
It had these physical rubber pads that producers would tap to trigger drum sounds, but the genius of the MPC was its swing or bounce feature.
The swing.
It didn't quantize the drum hits to a perfectly rigid mathematical grid. It humanized the rhythm by slightly delaying certain hi-hat or snare hits by just a few milliseconds.
Just a tiny fraction of a second.
Exactly. That microscopic delay is what gives 90s hip-hop that neck-snapping groove that makes you involuntarily nod your head.
And the metalcore guitarists are replicating that microscopic delay.
Precisely. A metalcore guitarist playing a breakdown is muting their incredibly low-tuned, heavily distorted guitar strings with the palm of their hand and striking them with the exact same syncopated, slightly delayed swing as a 90s hip-hop producer hitting an MPC pad.
That is wild.
It's the exact same rhythmic groove, just translated through a heavy metal instrument instead of a sampled drum break. The space between the notes, the bounce, it's hip-hop architecture built with metal materials.
Hip-hop architecture built with metal materials. Wow.
That's the underlying blueprint JJ is demonstrating. It's why this mixtape can jump from a smooth 90s R&B track to a crushing metalcore track without you ever losing the groove.
Okay, now that we understand these intricate architectural blueprints, how 80s pop synths served as the underground drug that fueled electro rap, and how angry grunge eventually synthesized into this metalcore Frankenstein that bounces exactly like an MPC drum machine, we have to ask the practical question.
Who is listening to this?
Yeah. who is meant to endure this 3.5-hour sonic journey. And, like, how are they supposed to listen to it? Because a 74-track continuous mix is a massive commitment of human attention.
JJ is very clear about the target demographic for mental overload. It's highly specific.
Okay.
First, it's curated for the late-night cruisers. Anyone who understands the cinematic magic of staring out a passenger window or taking a long drive past midnight, you need a certain atmospheric headspace to absorb this volume of music.
Makes sense.
Second, it's for the genre-blind music heads. Listeners who actively ignore rigid radio categories and want to hear that architectural thread connecting the R&B bass line to the metal chug.
And the third.
Finally, it is for the Y2K nostalgists. Those who vividly remember the tactile scratch of a permanent Sharpie on a silver CDR and the agonizing multi-day anticipation of a LimeWire buffering progress bar.
Oh man, the buffering bar. So much anxiety. And JJ gives us one incredibly specific, direct instruction on how to consume this mix. The notes say, turn the volume up, ignore the occasional compression pop, and let the genres bleed together. Pay attention to how a lazy, cool, melodic guitar line from 2000's indie rock echoes the atmospheric synth pads of a 1980s new wave track. But what exactly is a compression pop in this context?
A compression pop is a tiny audio artifact, a digital glitch.
Like a crackle.
Yeah. When you take a massive uncompressed audio file from a recording studio and shrink it down into a 320 kilobits per second MP3 so it can be downloaded over the internet, the software encoder has to strip away certain high and low frequencies to save space.
Right, compression.
Occasionally, the encoder struggles with a complex piece of audio and it leaves behind a microscopic pop or crackle in the digital file.
So what does this all mean? When JJ tells you to ignore the compression pop, I read that as a profound instruction for the listener. Today, we demand lossless audio, Dolby Atmos, perfect, pristine, sterile sound from our streaming services.
We expect perfection.
JJ telling you to embrace the pop is a deliberate rejection of modern passive listening habits. It's a demand that you appreciate the gritty, imperfect, LimeWire-bitten journey of the music itself. The digital flaw isn't a mistake to be fixed. It's a timestamp.
It proves it's human.
It proves this compilation was made by human hands, painstakingly dragging files into a folder, not auto-generated by a frictionless algorithm.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, about your own relationship with music today.
Yeah.
We are so conditioned to use music as passive background noise while we work, study, or scroll on our phones. But JJ is urging you to engage in active listening.
Active listening.
You are being asked to actively hunt for these cross-decade echoes, to actually sit there, giving the audio your full attention, waiting for the moment where the indie rock guitar sounds exactly like the 80s synth pad. It turns the act of listening into an interactive psychological puzzle.
I love that.
If you just put this 3.5-hour mix on while you do your taxes, it will eventually just sound like chaotic, disjointed noise. But if you actively engage with the blueprints we've discussed today, tracing the evolution from the gated snare to the MPC drum machine, it transforms into a masterclass in musical connectivity.
Which really is the perfect way to summarize what we've discovered in these notes today. Mental overload is so much more than just a massive Y2K nostalgia dump on a 700 megabyte CDR.
It really is.
It is a thesis. It's an argument proving that the gap between 1980s synth pop, golden era rap, and modern metalcore doesn't actually exist. They're all just different expressions of the exact same technological evolution and the exact same human desire to constantly swing the pendulum between perfect studio polish and raw basement grit.
It forces you to view music not as isolated eras, but as one continuous, unbroken thread of tension and release across 3 decades.
And, it leaves me with one final kind of wild thought to mull over, building on JJ's entire timeline. We've explored how these distinct genres from the 80s to the early 2000s are just cycles of rebellion, eventually scaling up into gloss.
Right.
We've seen how the screaming angst of grunge softens into daydream rock, and how the metalcore breakdown is just a heavy metal mirror of golden era boom bap. But JJ's timeline largely stops in the early 2000s, which makes you wonder, what will the chaotic, hyper-blended music of today spawn in 20 years?
That's a great question.
Right now, we have artists seamlessly blending country acoustic guitars, trap hi-hats, and hyper-pop electronic vocals into 2-minute algorithm-optimized TikTok songs.
The current level of synthesis is unprecedented, and the polish is largely driven by artificial intelligence and algorithmic optimization.
So in 2 decades, when the youth decide to rebel against their parents' music, what will that look like? Will the next generation crave an even more hyper-polished synthetic AI-driven sound? Or will the pendulum swing back as hard as it possibly can?
It always swings back.
Will they violently reject the algorithms, the seamless perfection, and the frictionless Spotify playlists, and swing all the way back to the ultimate basement grit? Will we see kids in garages intentionally making music with out-of-tune guitars, broken amplifiers, and cheap cassette recorders just to feel something physical and real again?
If JJ's architectural blueprint proves anything, it's that whenever music reaches a peak of sterile perfection, a violent, gritty correction is always coming.
It really is inevitable. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope we've given you the map you need to navigate this incredible audio journey. So grab your metaphorical Sharpie, fire up that mental CDR, ignore the compression pops, and let the genres bleed.